Welcome to the Remnant by Reclaim 611 podcast. I am Paula, and I usually have Carrie with me today, but today I am doing this solo, and we have a very, very special guest. She was on our podcast a few episodes back, and we brought her back because May is Mental Health Awareness Month, and we want to be able to highlight something about mental health. And she did such a great job talking about trauma and the brain. And so we wanted to invite her back so we can do a deep, deep dive into trauma and the brain for sure. So we are happy to have back Carrie Windham. Carrie is an MMFT, and she has been a peace officer since 2004. She has been an instructor for the West Central Texas Law Enforcement Academy since 2008, and she develops and presents training at various state and national conferences. She has a bachelor's degree in applied behavioral science and a master's degree in marriage and family therapy, specializing in the effects and treatment of emotional and psychological trauma. She currently works as a licensed marriage and family therapist associate, providing psychotherapy to adult, adolescent, and child victims of violent crimes under the supervision of Janet Lavelle Jurgens. She's also a victims' rights advocacy and legal accompaniment service partner. All right. So I'm not going to go through her bio this time, but I just wanted to give you a brief synopsis of who Carrie is. And so, Carrie, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's such a pleasure.
Yes, definitely. I mean, you said so much last time, and you just captured, you just drew us in, and especially with your analogies and with how you were able to paint pictures so that we could see and understand. So we definitely wanted to get you back on so we could have another conversation about trauma and the brain. And so you do work, you still work with victims of sex crimes, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Um,
Okay. And so that kind of goes in with sex trafficking and sexual abuse and all of that kind of stuff. And so as we begin the podcast, I would like to start with this question. What does our brain look like before trauma? What does a healthy functioning brain look like?
okay. Just a quick review of the last podcast. Two things that need to be addressed to see what a healthy brain looks like, or a healthy, non-traumatized brain, is that we really do have, of sorts, two brains in our head. The thinking brain, which is, consists of the prefrontal cortex. It is responsible for our consciousness, problem solving, logic, rational reasoning. And the second brain, which is the majority of our brain, probably 95% of it, is what's referred to as the feeling brain. And this includes the limbic system, which is our nervous system, and our body, and the brain stem. Um, the feeling brain is responsible for the emotional context and relevance of experiences. It's responsible for perception and basic needs like eating, sleeping, and arousal. So, saying all that, a healthy functioning brain requires the thinking brain and the feeling brain to work in conjunction, like in tandem with each other. So when we feel stress, we normally, the thinking brain is in charge. That's really where we want to operate from, is the thinking brain, and still have access to the feeling brain when needed. So when we feel stressed, the feeling brain can kick in, and the whole brain is able to cope, and we can effectively come back to a steady state. So the way that I kind of um, liken this to is like a ship just, rocking along on the water, and some sort of life stressor, some sort of life event happens and knocks us off kilter. And then we come back to a steady state. That is how a healthy brain, a non-traumatized brain, works. And it works in being able, the way that we would describe it is really relying on four things. Number one, that we are able to reliably perceive the world and objectively problem solve with flexibility. Okay, so that again, we're using both parts of our brain. The feeling brain is going to be looking out for things and giving us problems, and the thinking brain is going to use reason, logic, and our problem solving abilities to work through those problems. Number two, recognize and tolerate feelings long enough to learn from them and be able to manage them. Okay, so our feelings in a non-traumatized brain are very good. They send us signals. They send us signals to operate within this world. Um, if there is danger, we're gonna get a feeling or emotion of fear or anxiety. Those are good things because then they cue the thinking brain into problem solving mode. Number three, you should have a stable sense of identity, who you are, right? Uh, and have an adequate amount of self-efficacy. Now, self-efficacy is often a big term, so I'm just going to tell you what that is.
Okay.
Self-efficacy, um, it relates to the confidence in your ability to control your life. To exert control over your motivations, your behaviors, just your environment in itself, that you have some sort of control over your life decisions, your life plans, your life, um, the stressors that come up, that you can actually be effective in your life and not be just a bystander in your life,
Mhm.
that you are actually in control of some sort of things that what you want to do. Number four is the ability to form trusting relationships and rely on those relationships for support. Those are very important. And those four items right there that I listed off is what we would term or look at to see if somebody is functioning in a healthy manner. So
Mhm.
that's what the brain looks like prior to trauma, or a non-traumatized brain is what it would look
Gotcha.
like.
Okay. So let me ask
Okay.
you this. So when you come in contact with victims, do you have to, let's say, specifically go through those four things, or after talking with them, you realize that they're missing maybe one of the four, two of the four, or
Well, in a little while, when we look at what trauma does, they're pretty much all affected by trauma.
Mhm.
Um,
Okay.
it leaves such a destruction. Um, I liken it to a tornado. Like, that's what we're doing after trauma. A tornado has come by and it's left all of this destruction. We have to clean up and we have to, reorganize things. And because everything is affected, you can't hardly anything in your brain is not, um, because it's a whole system. It's systems within a system. They're all kind of connected. So
Gotcha.
one leads to the other, and um, if that makes sense.
It makes sense. So all of those four things are affected
Yeah,
when
most
there's
likely.
trauma.
Yeah.
When there's trauma. Gotcha. Okay. So I'm sure you have seen victims. Of course you have. You work with victims of sex crime. And so can you kind of give us a picture, or paint a picture, or help us understand what the brain looks like during trauma, like
Yes.
while you're experiencing it?
Um, so, like we talked about with healthy functioning, and the two um, parts of the brain, or two brains working in conjunction or in tandem with each other during trauma, the whole brain basically becomes disorganized and overwhelmed. I refer to the brain a lot as like a computer.
Mm-hmm.
It glitches out, or it freezes up, or it gets too hot. So
Okay.
during a trauma, it's overwhelmed.
Gotcha.
The feeling brain, which is already a large part of our whole system here, takes over and becomes a survival brain. Okay. And so when a person experiences a traumatic event, adrenaline and all other types of hormones rush through the body. And at that point, there is also a change um, in the way memory is managed because of the cocktail of hormones that are rushing through and kicking the whole system into a higher gear. Kind of like when you're driving a car, you have the drive and you have overdrive.
Mm-hmm.
You should be operating, normally in life and drive,
Right.
and overdrive is only used periodically when there's a specific reason. So the brain kicks into overdrive. Um, when the hormones are kicked in, and it kicks the whole brain and body into overdrive, the memory is now imprinted into the amygdala. The memory of the trauma is imprinted into the amygdala, which is a part of the limbic system, and it's responsible for alarming us to danger. Um, it's looking at every sensory input that we have, and it's deciding whether this sensation is good or bad for us. That's all it is. It's two things: good or bad.
Mm-hmm.
The amygdala holds the emotional significance of the event, because remember, the feeling brain is the one that's responsible for emotional significance of experiences, and so the amygdala is the primary one for that. So the amygdala holds that emotional significance. The stronger it includes the intensity and the impulse of the emotion. So whatever's coming in, if it's high fear, it's going to take a snapshot of everything going on, and that's the imprint
Mm.
of of the event.
Okay.
Like for example, if you're on a roller coaster, your sensory information, all this stuff coming at you, it's in effect saying, it's fear,
Mm-hmm.
speed,
Uh-huh.
stress,
Uh,
excitement, big part, not life threatening. All
right.
right, that's very important. In a healthy functioning brain, this is what's coming at you. The amygdala can read that event, the roller coaster. It reads the emotional significance of the roller coaster, and it determines it's a fun ride, which you're going to be off of in just a few minutes, right? So that's what we would expect from a healthy functioning brain. Um, but during a trauma, the amygdala stores the visual images of a trauma as sensory fragments, which we touched on in the first podcast,
Mm-hmm.
which means basically that the trauma memory is not stored like a story.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't have a beginning, a middle, and an end, but it's rather stored as how our five senses were experiencing that trauma
Gotcha.
during the trauma.
Mm-hmm.
So the memories are stored through fragments, basically, of visual images, smells, sounds, touch, taste, all of those things. That's what's happening during a traumatic event.
Wow. So it's just capturing these pictures
Yeah, it's
and
it's capturing the sensations of whatever
sensations.
was experienced. Absolutely.
So it's more sensory.
Mm-hmm.
Gotcha. All right. So that's during trauma.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, what happens after trauma? How does the brain look after trauma? As you compared, as you gave us an analogy of a healthy brain, right?
Yeah.
And the thinking and the feeling, the two systems inside of the brain. What happens to that brain after trauma?
Okay. Mainly three big changes.
Okay.
Okay. We're going to go back to the ship on the water.
Mm-hmm.
So after trauma, those who have, trauma symptoms or the diagnoses of like post-traumatic stress disorder, it's the ship that has been hit by the stress,
Mm-hmm.
gotten off kilter, and has stayed that way. It has not come back. So that's where we are.
Wow.
That's the visual that I want to show about this. And it happens in three big ways uh, that affect all of the whole life of the person, the whole life, everything about them.
Okay.
Okay, so the first one is that the feeling brain has become the survival brain and has stayed there.
Mm.
Okay, the feeling brain hijacks basically the thinking brain, because especially if we're talking about long-term, like human trafficking, sex trafficking, complex trauma, multiple events or prolonged high intensity events,
Mm-hmm.
this person has experienced, pervasive fear
Mm.
for, a long term, um, to where it has become that they are unsafe in their bodies. They feel unsafe with their feelings, and even ultimately unsafe with their thoughts, um, because the feeling brain is so overactivated. So this person then relies consistently on, um, automatic survival responses. Okay, fight, flight, or freeze. They're on pretty much constantly.
Mm-hmm.
Everything is an automatic response because of the wiring that took place during the trauma. The imprints that have been left in the amygdala. Because remember, the amygdala is the one that's supposed to come in. Everything comes through. Everything filters through that to decide whether it's safe or if it's good for us. I mean, whether it's safe or unsafe, basically, good or bad for us.
Mm-hmm.
And it has been filled with these imprints, and so it is overactivated, it is overstimulated. um, and this is one thing that I wanted to definitely point out to the audience or anybody listening trying to understand a little bit about trauma is we, as a society, we kind of believe that people make, they either make good or bad decisions, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But in reality, somebody that has been traumatized cannot, effectively access their thinking brain to make decisions. Remember, the thinking brain is the problem solver, it's the rational reasoning, it's the logic, it's the one that makes decisions. The feeling brain has responses or reactions. It doesn't think, it just reacts.
Mm-hmm.
So somebody who is, um, traumatized, who is effectively living in their survival brain, are not making decisions.
Mm.
They're just having reactions to external stimuli or internal stimuli, whatever's going on inside of them or whatever's going on outside of them. They're just simply automatic responses, fight, flight, or freeze. Um, so most behavior in those are simply reflexive, and they're based on feelings and sensory input rather than on logic or rationale. So that is the number one thing. The number two is that they have an overactive alarm system
Mm-hmm.
that alerts for danger everywhere, everywhere. Um, so after the trauma, knowing what happened with the amygdala, the brain can be easily triggered by sensory input because it's got so much of that imprinting that has happened within the amygdala itself. So it tends to read normal circumstances as dangerous.
Gotcha.
Okay. For example, a red light is no longer just a red light. Okay. Now it's a possible spark. Okay. If somebody was in a fire, or, even cooking a steak and you have the smoke,
Mm-hmm.
it's not just smoke from the steak anymore. It's a dangerous situation. That was somebody that was caught in a fire.
Mm-hmm.
Smoke is now, you know, um, not just smoke. It's life threatening. That's what goes back to, not like the roller coaster where your amygdala understands that it's not life threatening. The amygdala has been so overactivated that it no longer is able to like read things clearly and gauge between safe and unsafe. So it's like false alarms going off everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
A barbecue, um, prior to the trauma, was just a barbecue, but now it's like an explosion.
Mm.
um, the sensory fragments that have come in that are coming in now currently after the trauma are misinterpreted, and the brain loses its ability to discriminate basically between what is threatening and what is normal. So you've got this going on. That is a big factor in being able to function in the world if we cannot effectively determine what is safe and what is not safe. So they're feeling a lot danger in dangerous situations. They're feeling a lot danger in neutral situations. And most sadly, danger in positive situations.
Gotcha.
Okay. Things are misinterpreted. And it's that misinterpretation that it really impacts their lives.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because this profoundly affects somebody's ability to be present in their future, in the present right now,
Mm-hmm.
safe, and it affects their ability to use resources and relationships that, remember back when we looked at a non-traumatized brain, one of the key things was to be able to be in healthy relationships for support.
Mm-hmm.
And this is one of the things that are just stripped away. Relationships are no longer safe anymore. People are not supportive. They're judgy. It's all threatening. Everything is threatening now.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and the third thing that really is left behind in that the tornado of the trauma is one's they're unable to effectively and objectively assess the present,
Mm.
like we just covered that, and learn from it.
Okay.
So in essence, the present becomes very distorted. Negative experiences are emphasized, and any positive experiences are minimized. It's like blinders have come down. They're just seeing negative. They're just seeing things that are a threat. They're just seeing things that are dangerous, whether it's physical or psychological, emotional. Um, they've got a filter been put on their eyes that are really um, emphasizing negative and blind to any positive stuff. So they could have, like, 10 great things going for them. Um, and the one bad thing will be consuming.
Mm-hmm.
It'll be consuming.
So how, um, I guess, yeah, this is a good question. I know with, let's say, physically, if I hurt my shoulder, um, I'll go through physical therapy and all of that to try to get it to function like it used to function, right? Um, to increase my range of motion and all of that other stuff. And while a lot of it is physical, some of it is mental because, I'm thinking that, oh, this might hurt. So, how is it possible to get a traumatized brain to function like a normal, healthy brain again?
Yes, yes,
Okay.
it can. Because that is one of the things that, again, was covered in the first podcast, or not this question, but
Mm-hmm.
the neuroplasticity of a brain, meaning that it does develop and form according to experiences. So if you have a lot of traumatizing experiences, it's going to develop around that. It's going to get really good at being, of alerting to the fight, flight, or freeze mode, being in survival. Once safety has been established and the person feels relatively safe and is, like in counseling or therapy, the brain can adapt that way again. It will then make new neural connections and new development, and it will develop around the safe state. Okay, and there's a lot of work that goes into it because most of it is automatic. It's now, in the feeling brain, those are the subconscious levels. Those are the ones that, in the limbic system, it's become conditioned to trauma. So conditioning is just, something that has happened so much. This is one thing I was going to bring up. Something that has happened so much. It is an automatic response. It's kind of like me. Okay, I can look at a lemon. Like, if I think about a lemon hard enough, my mouth will start watering. The pucker thing will start happening
Mm-hmm.
just by thinking about it. That's a conditioned response.
Mm-hmm.
That is the automatic response. I cannot sit here with my thinking brain and tell my mouth not to get, go into that pucker response, right?
Mm-hmm.
That somewhere I learned, I guess I ate a really tart lemon, and that just kind of linked and zinced into my brain, right? That's what happens with trauma. These things are not at most of the time, not at all in the thinking brain. They're just in this part, and that links the brain and body together.
Okay.
So um, this is the automatic response is one of the biggest parts of trauma because they have no control over it. I have no control over my pucker response, right? The physiological reactions that occur within somebody, they don't really have any control over it. That was what I was trying to discuss a while ago when I was saying that these are not choices that they're making. These reactions are not choices. They're not conscious decisions. Um, it is a thing that is kicked in the body and the feeling brain. Just like if you shoved pepper up somebody or sniff pepper, you cannot tell yourself don't sneeze. That's a physiological response.
Mm-hmm.
That's how little control the thinking brain has over anything, right? So what my whole point is, that is where the trauma is, and that is the effect of trauma. So when you can, one of the first things that I do is the brain and body healing,
Okay.
is to control and try to shift control of the life, control of everything back into bringing and thinking brain into alignment, and to have the two parts working again. So there's a lot of body work that occurs to calm the nervous system before we can, really even effectively talk about anything. We have to do a lot of body work first
Okay.
to get the whole brain back online
Mm-hmm.
and the whole brain back. And what is once that occurs, then we can start looking at um, what we want to change and how we want to work, and then the whole brain can adapt to the new circumstances, the new information coming in, what we're learning, what I want to do with my life. It can adapt if we get it back to a safe state first, to where it actually is all there working.
So the key is the word safe. That's the
Mm-hmm.
key. All right. That's the
Yeah.
key to getting the brain back to a normal, healthy place.
Yeah.
Um, we were talking, and you said that trauma teaches you to make a decision from an attempt to meet a need.
Yeah. I said that, yeah, in the first podcast.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah. It teaches us to make a decision from an attempt to meet a need. Um, can you go through that again a little bit?
Well, all human behavior is our behavior is based on an attempt to meet a need, and that can get a little distorted when we're traumatized because of all of the subconscious physiological reactions and responses that are going on. So they can look a lot bigger. It can look traumatized individuals. Okay, so we all have a need to feel safe. That's a need. We need to feel safe, all of us. A traumatized individual, because the feeling brain is so overstimulated and basically so big because we've used it so much. Their attempts to meet a need sometimes can look scary. Their need to feel safe and to protect themselves from somebody who has lived in trauma for years and years and years. Um, it can look like overreactions. Um, it can look like rage, going into a rage if somebody if they perceive a threat from somebody, uh, even an emotional threat like um, I'm really tired of that behavior, or I don't like that behavior, whatever it is,
Mhm.
and they feel unsafe. They feel unsafe in the relationship. They feel unsafe that they're going to be hurt. It can look like a big scary reaction from them, an outburst, an angry outburst, a big verbal, or even going into aggressive behavior, and that that is their attempt to meet their need of protection and to feel safe again, right? Does that make sense? All behavior can be traced back to somebody trying to meet a need that they have. However, when somebody is traumatized, it can often look like an overreaction, whether it's like an overt thing or withdrawn, completely withdrawn and kind of um, zoning out. Those are all reactions. Those are all behaviors because something was threatened and they
So
need to feel.
how you said that everything can look like it's an overreaction. So how do you teach or counsel or help someone to see that their response is an overreaction?
Yeah, oftentimes, and that goes back into one of the elements on the healthy functioning brain is a sense of identity, healthy sense of identity, and then also self-efficacy, feeling like I can control, I can, be effective in my life. That is injured in trauma because a lot of times because of after the trauma and how they're experiencing the world and how they're interacting in the world. Now, I'm going somewhere with this.
Okay.
um, this when they have these outbursts, okay, they have been something has been come in to their to their brain as a threat for whatever, whether it was real or not. Something has come in, and they have this overreactions. Oftentimes, when things have settled down, they may see for themselves that they have overreacted, which then influences their identity and their self-efficacy because now I'm a basket case. One person said this and I'm just, and so there's shame that's brought in. I'm weird, I'm screwed up, there's something wrong with me. What's wrong with me? In that moment, oftentimes it is it is a conditioned response. It is the feeling brain has taken over and everything is filtered through life or death. And so if something does affect me as a threat, I'm going to full force protect myself from whatever. And then things have calmed down a little bit and they've seen this behavior in themselves, and it's very shaming. And so then that is one of the worst things that I see. It's horrible.
Mm-hmm.
It's horrible to have somebody feel like that. And I hate it. Because shame is different than guilt. All right. Guilt is feeling bad about something you've done, and shame is feeling bad about who you are. So
Mm.
their identity has been hijacked as well, and their sense of that I can't even control myself. This is what I can't even control myself. I can't even control my behavior. How can I control my life? I screw
Mm.
up everything around me. I nobody wants to talk to me. I've pushed everybody away, or I've gone off on them, or all of these things. It's horrible. It's so sad and that is all from that the fight, flight, or freeze response that just takes over and comes out in all kinds of benign or very minimal kind of experiences. It still comes out
Mm-hmm.
as a threat.
Gotcha. So how do you get them to get off that spiral of saying, I can't even control my life. My life is a mess. I'm a mess. You know, what do you do in those moments? Do you just let them get it out? And, or how do you deal with that?
if if I were doing a treatment plan, one of the things on it would be to normalize. I want to educate them on what are the impacts of trauma.
Gotcha.
Okay, so that you're not weird, that
Mhm.
it's a normal reaction to a very abnormal situation that you found yourself in, right? So this is brain science, and I love this part because I get to really show proof as to why they're having these experiences,
Mhm.
that you're not screwed up. It's because your brain is so good. This is what I say. Your brain is so good. It's so good at keeping you safe,
Yeah.
right? It's not going to let you get harmed again. So now it's like detecting everywhere. I mean, it's looking all over the place, scanning the environment for any kind of perceived danger because it wants to keep you safe. So That's the way that I do it, because that is the truth. That's the truth right there. There's nothing
That's
wrong with them.
that's good. Your brain wants to keep you safe. That's really good. As we get ready to wrap up, is there anything else you want to share with us about trauma and the brain?
Um, um, I could add one more piece to the meeting a need, and how trauma really, your feeling brain can keep you so safe that it hijacks your life.
Mhm.
And this is like, if you've been attacked out in the world, and now your brain is saying you can't leave your house, it's unsafe, everything, so it keeps you safe. Even if it's you stuck in your bedroom, it's going to keep you safe, but it's robbed the rest of your life,
Mm,
everything about it.
gotcha. Okay, well, that's some really good stuff about the brain. I love hearing about how the brain functions and how it protects us and keeps us safe, and the thinking brain and the feeling brain. And I thought it was very interesting that when trauma happens, we go more into that feeling brain,
Yeah.
and that thinking brain is hijacked, and our decision making is hijacked, and everything is kind of looked at through the lens of feelings and how it's making me feel. So thank you so much for sharing that with us during Mental Health Awareness Month. Thank you for taking out time to share with the listeners again and educate us on the brain and trauma. So if you have any questions, you can email us at support@reclaim611.org, or you can check out the website at www.reclaim611.org. And don't forget, listeners, step into the fight. Thank you. Bye bye.